and welcome to the third of these insightful conversations about place. These videos are free to access and are aimed at A-level geography students studying the Changing Spaces Making Places unit, although they are available for anyone interested in hearing more about the built environment and listening to different perspectives on how we design, understand, and experience the places we spend time. They are part of a project called Your Place Curriculum, funded by the Ove Arup Foundation and developed by Place with support from Our Place. Today, I welcome Karen Jelenje, a creative practitioner and educator with over 7 years of experience working in the built environment sector. Working in a number of versatile roles, Karen is passionate about using design and creativity as a tool for social change, and in particular, working with young people. I look forward to hearing more on this in our conversation today. Hello, Karen. I hope I pronounced your name right, actually. I should have checked.
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, great. Thank you for your time today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I mentioned there that you're a creative practitioner and educator. Can you tell us a little bit more about your actual job role currently and a typical day for you?
So currently I am the director of an organisation called Activate the City. We work with young people across all ages, but mainly from 14 to 25, getting the most out of young people's creative potential and seeing how they can make change in their local community. So we teach workshops and run summer programs all around how young people can get to know their local area and use their ideas to actually create an event or create an improvement to the space of the local area. So a lot of our work is really encouraging young people to use their creativity to solve problems.
Amazing. And so talk us through a typical day in your life doing this role.
Yeah, so I think my typical day, the background stuff is about kind of coming up with ideas of programs, designing programs, and then also sometimes we do work with other organizations like cultural institutions such as like the Design Museum. Mm-hmm. So before actually working with these organizations, I think about what I want out of a program, what I want young people to learn. So one example is a program that we did about climate change. I myself, I'm not fully clued up on climate change, but it's really about thinking about how we can collaborate with other organizations that will be able to give young people that knowledge about that. So a lot of the time we collaborate with like other creatives who also could be young creatives who are doing stuff around sustainability. And I'm really keen to make sure that every young person gets to try different things. So we look at people who are videographers, people who work in the the design sector, typically artists, textile artists as well. So it's really about learning about a topic, but also getting a chance to try different creative things. So that's what I'm keen to do. And then day to day, I guess it's like some of the things that I do as well is I'm based in London, so going to other spaces, so looking at like youth focused spaces and looking at outdoor spaces and public spaces and really like trying to understand like what makes a good public space, so that I have like a bank of case studies that I can show young people, and also finding places that are really interesting to visit. I think like the good thing about London is that there's so many amazing like spaces and places that sometimes you wouldn't even realize they existed. So I think I really like to explore like my city, and whilst doing that is also encouraging young people to do the same. So yeah.
Oh wow, there's like so many things I want to ask you about there. So I'm going to start off with first of all, what was like, Activate the City? It sounds incredible, and it's an award-winning project. Yeah. So tell me, what was like the initiative, like why did you feel that was needed to, where did it come from as an idea?
Yeah, so I think for me, I originally studied architecture at uni, so that was my undergraduate degree. And the reason why I decided to do architecture, I didn't really know like what an architect was when I was younger. And then like I I was born in London, but I'm from Malawi originally, but I came to Bolton, which is like in the north. I moved there as a young child, a very unfamiliar place. And my mum was doing a lot of like community work, like development work and bringing people together. And I think as a young person, I didn't really like appreciate how important it is for spaces for communities to come together. And also like we had like where I lived was an estate, so we had like lots of different issues around like fly tipping. And I think it's really important that communities can come together and like improve spaces themselves, so that, and also have the knowledge of like how to get funding for projects. So that was always in my mind. And I think for me, when I studied architecture, the reason why I did it was like, I want to be able to improve places for people who've come from backgrounds like me, perhaps that they're like immigrants as well, and they tend to live in a specific area which doesn't always cater for their needs. And then also during uni, I got to work with the Stephen Lawrence Trust, doing some mentoring with young people in schools, so going in and doing workshops with young people. And I think I really enjoyed that aspect of it, because you could just see like how creative young people were with like coming up with ideas, and that's something that kind of stuck with me. And then yeah, I went back to uni. I was working in housing for a bit in London, so my first sort of graduate job was working as a project manager, delivering like affordable housing, and that really opened up like seeing the inequalities that exist within London in terms of housing, and having suitable housing for people who might not be able to afford, like typical house, like rented market rent housing. And also just like how spaces were delivered for young people, so that the playgrounds that were designed that were never used. So like finding all these problems and being like, what can I do to solve it? And then yeah, I also ended up studying my master's in urban planning, and that gave me a wider perspective on like not just architecture, like designing buildings, but designing places, and how important it is to consider different issues and inequalities, and how you can design for that. And then I worked for like a private sector company, and I just wasn't really enjoying it. Like it just felt like I wasn't using my skills for what I wanted. And then I finished that job, and then I was like, you know what? I've got all this experience and sort of things that I've been able to go through my life and see, like, I really enjoy working with young people. I've seen these inequalities that exist in cities. What can I do? What can I create that might give me a chance to do the projects that I want? And I guess that's how Activate the City was born. Really, it's like a culmination of all like my experiences and things that I wanted in terms of the work that I want to do, and kind of the joy that I get from working with young people, but also being able to work on solving problems around like cities. So, and I think for me, the most important thing is that as a young child, as I mentioned, like with my mum and seeing like all the things that she did like in the local communities, like, I was involved with some of it, but I think young people are really great sort of people who can start to make change in local communities, because it's something that they can learn at a young age, and then as they get older, they can hopefully continue and create change. So yeah.
Wow, what a story. I mean, I think that's so inspirational, and yeah, it's amazing to hear how the journey that got you to where you are now. And just for young people that participate in Activate the City, do they have something do they present something back once they've done something, or is there not a finished product, but is there something that they work towards? I know you mentioned one particular project about the climate change that we'll come back to, but
yeah, I think for me it's making sure that the other thing that I didn't mention that's linked to the work that I do is to make sure that young people can improve their employability skills. So having, what I found even as a young person trying to find a job is like a lot of them ask, what experience do you have, So it's really important for me that there's an outcome from all the work that I do with young people. So having like a project showcase, or like an event where they organize something and they're able to build skills such as like working with communities, fundraising, and being able to actually like coordinate and project manage an event, for instance. So for me it's really about developing skills for the workplace, because I think there's a lot of skills that you might learn in school, for instance, like the knowledge part, but not the actual how do you apply these skills, soft skills. So things like that help you think about creativity, but help you solve problems. And I think when you have to work as a team as well, so we work with like cohorts, so about 10 young people at a time on a long-term basis for like a summer project. But it's like getting them to work as a team, and hopefully there'll be a diverse range of abilities and also different experiences that they can share. But it's really about how do you develop your communication skills, team working, and then the skills that are required to deliver an event for like a local area or community. So yeah, I think for me, that's one core element, is to make sure that, you know, at the end of it, they've got a case study that they can show a potential employer and be like, this is what I achieved over summer.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. And what's the process how do they participate? How do they get on? You know, how can they get involved, these young people? Do you have a selection process? Like, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, we try and keep it flexible, but for instance, some of the projects that we're looking to deliver or delivering would be specifically in a local, like certain areas. So like I'm based in North London in Tottenham. So some of the work that we've done is like with the local council. So we'll try and make sure that at least the local area can benefit, like young people from the local area can benefit. But like also working with like youth clubs as well, and reaching out to them and seeing if there's something that young people are interested in. But yeah, just for me, it's just making sure that somebody who might not have a chance to access something like this over summer, or maybe not able to afford it, is able to participate. So most of the things that I do, I try and make sure that they're free for young people. So again, like trying to fundraise for them and seek sponsorship from like other organizations and to try and make that happen.
Amazing. And I know that you kind of mentioned in our little brief chat before we are recording that you sort of wish there had been something like that around when you were a young person growing up, to get that kind of those practical skills and experiment and be creative and opportunity to. So it's amazing that you're kind of now providing that for young people in your area. I've got lots of questions and I don't know where to start, but you mentioned there about going out and exploring your own city and kind of building up a nice bank of examples of good places, good spaces. So what do you think makes a really good place? Oh, maybe that's a hard question, but
yeah, I think that's a hard question, but maybe I'll give an example of like even my local area where I am. What I really like about it, there's lots of things that I'd say need improving, but the things that I value, which perhaps has also been helped by the fact that, you know, during COVID and appreciating green spaces, there's a park like maybe a 2-minute walk away from me. And you know, it's really busy, so there's like you know, play area and there's kids playing there all the time. So I think having green space is really important, especially in cities, just for not even just like well-being, but places like some families can go to, because some people don't even have gardens. And in cities that are like quite urban, you know, there's a lot of high rises, so they might not have outdoor spaces. So I think that's one really important ingredient for like what makes a really good city. And then whenever I've been to a city, I always try, like, I'm from Malawi, so like a lot of the food that we eat maybe can't be found in a supermarket.
yeah.
But I think like a high street that has like you know, international shops is something that's really important to me. So whenever I go to a new area, I try and find out like where are these like specialist shops where I can buy like my plantain, certain tropical fruits, so that I can make, you know, the food that I'm used to eating at home and stuff. So I think something that has like a link to like culture or culture where you're from, and that diversity as well. I think like where I live now in Tottenham, there's so many different nationalities, and you can see that from like the way the high street, you know, how it services people. I think where there's like a diverse range of people, I think you can learn a lot from different communities. And yeah, I think it's important to have spaces for meeting as well. So community centres, like, I think is really important, especially for bringing together like families, and especially like places where kids can go to after school and play as well. So yeah.
And not have those playgrounds that aren't used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you'd think in a development, just because it's the playground, that a child will definitely use it. But I think design plays a major role. Like, if something doesn't look safe, then parents aren't going to let their kids play on it. And also, if it's been designed without thinking about, you know, lighting, color and safety, I think it is something that I started learning more about as I was working in the housing sector, is like how important each element of design is, and how important, first of all, as well, is to speak to the community. So a lot of the projects I did were around estate regeneration, so there'll be existing communities there. And I think it's really important to speak to the local community about like what they want, if there's going to be change, and actually make an effort to make sure that some of these things get achieved.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, you feel that the communities do have a really important role in that kind of placemaking process, and should always be involved in that process. Yeah.
Definitely. I think right from the start, I think if you're going into a community, and you're coming up with a new development, it's really important to understand the context of that community and their needs. And, you know, like, in terms of what happens when these needs are not met when a development is delivered, is that people move out and they're displaced. So it's really being conscious about that, and letting them, you know, have a say. And it might be that they might not be able to achieve everything that they want, but at least working with them along the whole process of delivering. So from the initial design stage to kind of like the delivery, and also just like if something isn't good, like hearing feedback from communities is really important as well.
And how do you think the best way is to involve communities, or is there just several different ways, or does it just depend on the project and the area, and maybe there's no best way? Do you have
I think it's really difficult. Engagement is one of those things where you can get right, you can get it right, or you can get it wrong. But I think really thinking about how inclusive you are in the engagement process. So different issues that can come up. So like what time of the day it is, people who have who are looking after children, or they're having to work long hours. Making sure that it's not a tick box exercise where you just fill in the form and give your views. So that's something that I've experienced, where like in my local area in Bolton, they were having a development and they just sent a postcard through the door, and you had to like give your opinion for a postcard. And I think actually having events are really good, but like I think one thing that I've seen which is really good is like a community event that somebody's organized, where there are activities happening, but then also it's an opportunity to chat to people in that setting, where it's also like kind of more informal, where you're just chatting to people. And I think people are a bit more trusting when it's like they know what they're signing up for. So a community event where like, you know, you've got like something like somewhere for the children to play, maybe some food, some activities, where you can get everyone to kind of be involved in different things, and not just like a room where there's chairs and you just sit down and listen to what's happening. So I think something that's a bit more active, maybe like outdoor setting. I think that's what in terms of examples that I've seen, is I think the ones that I've been more successful is when there's a variety of activities happening, and activities that involve people in maybe doing something creative, to give their opinion on the design of something. So yeah,
absolutely. And just to kind of touch on what you mentioned before around that job role in housing and regeneration, and you mentioned how it really opens your eyes to the inequalities and social inequalities. Do you feel like, what role does placemaking, or those making decisions around regeneration, have in responding to those social inequalities? Do they have a responsibility to address it somehow in the decisions they make?
Definitely. I think it's really hard because I guess like having worked in housing, you realize a lot of the decision gets made is quite top up. So you might have made some points about development, about how it needs to be improved, but at the end of the day, there's a few select people who make decisions. I think when it comes to like designers or anyone involved in placemaking, I think the most important thing is really being able to identify those inequalities and understanding what they are. So understanding the context, actively going to these communities, for instance, because I think a lot of the time it's just like, that they wouldn't maybe go into the community or engage and spend a long time in the community to understand the social issues that are happening and why they're happening. So I think it should be more of a collaborative process, especially like in terms of inequalities. There's going to be lots of, I think, working in housing made me realize there's so many different issues happening at one time. For instance, like working in estate regeneration, there might be social issues happening on the estate, but then you don't have a full context of why that happens. But I think the local community are the best people to speak to because they know their neighborhood better than anyone else. So I think in order to kind of design for trying to address that is really working closely with like co-designing with the community about how some of these things can be solved. So like antisocial behavior, for instance, a lot of the time, some of the resolution to that is maybe putting more CCTV or putting fences in places, or saying no ball games. And that's a sign that I used to see so much as a young kid. But you realize how important, like on our estate, for instance, like how important it is for kids to have somewhere to play. And no ball games as a sign is like, I just don't think it should be allowed.
It's not a nice message, is it?
It's not a very nice message. So I think that's obviously an example of like them not thinking practically about the like inequalities. It's just thinking, okay, how do we design out antisocial behavior? Let's put a sign up, But it's much deeper rooted than that. So I think, being able to work with the local community in terms of like provision for green spaces or play spaces, and making sure they're getting that right, because I think every community and local community has their own different characteristics. And I think for me is I always try and, when I go to places where people which are labeled as undesirable, I think I always try and find the positive aspect of them, because there could be a community who are really like close knit and that it's able to function as well as any other community, but it's labeled as like an undesirable place. So I think really trying to understand the context of an area is really important in terms of doing this, and the only way you can really do that is to speak to the local community and gain their trust as well. So and that's something that it takes time, and I think a lot of the building process doesn't allow for that time, because things happen really quickly. So
I mean, that was going to be my question really. I guess what's the challenge in being able to do that successfully? And I suppose time is a factor there, and perhaps it isn't always prioritized in the way that it could be or that it should be. But that's a really, really good simple example there of that no ball games sign. Do you feel that is the biggest issue currently in placemaking, that lack of sort of co-design or collaboratively, or like kind of community work and making sure that you're getting to know the area and the people that live in that area before anything happens there? Or do you feel that there are other issues, other challenges?
I think that's one aspect of it, the on the ground stuff, but the other aspect is like the decision making, like the policy. So I think especially with like building council housing, for instance, is like there's less funding from the government to do that, so they're having to create neighborhoods where there's a mixture of like private housing versus affordable housing. So there's less provision for like building affordable housing because they need to use the money that they're making from like private housing to fund the affordable housing. So I think there's a big issue with regards to the funding aspect of it, and also the local, like the decision making at policy level, where like developments, like there's things like Section 106, which is something that developers pay, and that's meant to be helping with things like paying for roads, primary schools in the local area. But sometimes councils are so stretched that they might need, they might charge section 106 on one development but not another, or they might have to keep those funds for other things. So I think, yeah, just the policy decision making level is also a challenge, because at the end of the day, that, you know, the idea for a development and kind of the planning aspect of it, of getting planning permission, really doesn't fall in the hands of the people. It falls in the hands of a few select individuals.
Yeah.
So I think, as when you talk about different people in placemaking, I think planners are really important in that aspect, and like they work very hard. So
Yeah.
I didn't realize the role of how much a role of a planner plays in placemaking, but it's a very important job. And I think it also goes back to, like, if you want to make a difference to a local community, like how do you get more people working as a planner or thinking about that as a career as well? Because I think the more people, more diverse people they are who are planners, or the more people that are planners, the more kind of change we can make in that aspect of things. So
yeah, definitely. And that was kind of going to be my next question, really, in terms of, do you feel that those at top level making those decisions are representative of society currently, or do we need more diverse representation there? And you've kind of answered that.
A lot of work needs to be done, but I know slowly it's improving. There's like lots of initiatives that are happening to try and get more like diverse people at the top. But I think that's definitely one issue where you need like so many. You need, in order to like be able to really, if you're trying to design something that ticks all the boxes, you need to have people who aren't the same around the table. And I think yeah, it's understanding how, like, you know, even young people having a seat at the table. So I know a lot of councils now are trying to have things like youth boards that make decisions, or help make towards decisions about local areas and what's happening in the local areas. I think that's a good move, but I think really, how do you keep that momentum going, and you know, the resources required to be able to have youth boards, for instance, or and even like incentives, like what do young people get out of it, like given their opinion. And I think that goes back to also, like, with Activate the City, is like one thing that I always, when I was thinking about, you know, doing this, is like, how do you incentivize young people and make them feel like they're valuable? And I think a lot of the time when we hire, like, you know, people, local young people, we pay them and make sure that they get paid for their opinions, or provide some sort of incentive. And I think councils, or even other people who are looking to work with young people, engage with them, need to really think about like how young people can be valued, rather than, you know, being a volunteer, for instance.
No, that's such a good point. Such a good point. It's good to hear that, in your opinion, you do feel that it is slowly changing and slowly improving, and that there are a few incentives to try and kind of get those decision makers to be a bit more representative of society as a whole. What are the challenges in that? I mean, I think we know the benefits of having those at the people with the power to make the change and make the decisions. If it was a more diverse range of people there, we'd hopefully end up with much better designed spaces and places that cater for everybody's needs, or lots of needs. What are the challenges though, if we have so many different people
I think
making those decisions?
I think the challenge could be, like, having so many different people is that you might not be able to make a decision. There might be so many differences in opinion. Ultimately a decision has to be made. So I think, again, it's about coming up with compromises about, and nothing's going to be perfect, but when I was talking earlier about how, like, working with the community, they might ask for X, Y, and Z, but you may be able to deliver maybe one of those things. And I think with design or designing places, there's always going to be a compromise. I think when I think back to, like, when I was studying architecture, it's like you come up with an idea, but then you realize soon after that you might have to change it. So I think being aware that things, you have to, like, compromise, or you have to improve things along the way. And I think things happening, because I think like when I was working in the council, there was so much great ideas about how things can be delivered, how we can work with the community, but unfortunately it took a long time to get these things approved, or there would be lag in time, and then the community would like lose trust. So I think the ability to be able to like make decisions is a good one, but a compromise as well, and see like, okay, if we can't deliver that, what's the next best thing? So I think you just really have to be open to working collaboratively, and I think that's the key to designing. And I think when I was like thinking about architects, I was like, oh, they're really important, but actually there's so many people involved in designing a place or designing a building, like people who do study landscape architecture, planners, these surveyors. And I think the more people know about like that, the better, because then you're like, oh right, it takes a whole massive team to make a place. And I think sometimes you can just be siloed in one role and kind of stick to that, but I think being open to collaborating with people and seeking expertise in different disciplines is really good.
Yeah, and I think, you know, your experience, you've had an experience of, you know, architecture, also in housing, also in urban planning. How would you I suppose, what is the difference between architecture and urban planning for young people listening to this? You know, if they're not quite sure, they know they maybe want to go into the built environment sector, and they're kind of like, oh, I don't quite know what role is for me then in that sector. Because you're right, there's a huge diverse range of different positions you can go into, and it takes a whole team of people to place make.
For sure.
So how do you figure out like which role you want to play, or, you know, what the differences are between them?
Yeah, I think it's also being open. Like for me, I thought like, I'm going to be an architect, you know, I'm going to do this. But yeah, I guess to start off simply, like being an architect really is thinking about how you design, I guess, spaces and buildings. So like housing, or even a house, structures such as like stadiums. So you're designing like the concept for like a stadium or a house, and then trying to deliver that. So I'd say architecture is focused on buildings mainly. Urban planning, urban design. So I actually studied urban planning, but then I ended up doing an urban design role. And urban design is looking at the bigger picture. So there's the houses that the architect has designed, but like, how do you make a place? So thinking about like roads, and we call it master planning, where you're planning like a whole town or city, and thinking about the number of houses that you need, but also like access to services such as schools, roads, and yeah, green spaces is also a big element of an urban design. Sometimes urban designers will design master plans, but also they'll design green spaces, individual green spaces. So what I really liked about urban design was like the bigger picture of like what makes a place, and realizing that like when you're creating communities, it's not just about the housing, it's also about like, how do you sustain communities for a long time through the provision that they have for, like, you know, schools. And how does a city function? Like a city can't function, you can put houses anywhere, but it can't function if there's no roads, if there's no green spaces, if there's no you know, hospital buildings. So that's more of a bigger wider picture, so you're like zooming out. But I'd say like, I think studying architecture was really helpful for me, because it helps me see that how diverse it is of going into, you can go into different routes into the built environment, or do other different jobs that I created. So I think it gives you a really good basis for understanding cities and how cities work, but then you can actually move into other disciplines that, you know, you might not have known. I didn't really know about urban design either when I was studying architecture too much. I'd heard about it, and landscape architecture, I was like, oh, this is just gardening, but actually it's a really important aspect of cities, and making sure like landscape architects can help like biodiversity, which is making sure that, you know, bees can, you know, stay alive, and the pollination, and how important it is for the functioning of, you know, green matter or anything that's like bio.
Yeah, definitely.
I think like, yeah, I think you just have to be flexible in what you want, but you can be an architect but do lots of different things too as part of as being an architect too. So you can branch into specialisms as well if you're interested in sustainability, for instance, is being able to like specialize in an area. So yeah.
Thank you for giving us a little bit of an insight into the differences there. So going on to kind of creating more sustainable places, and also just kind of the role that placemakers have in responding to the climate crisis that is going on right now. You mentioned there a project, Climate Lab, that you've been doing. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so yeah, last year I ran a project called Climate Lab, and it was really all about, COP26 was coming to Glasgow last year, and for me it was interesting because I realised that there wasn't really much happening in terms of youth engagement in London. So I was like, I think climate change it's a topic that's been around for a long time, but I think one thing that's really important is like, how do we get more diverse voices talking about them, or diverse young people being involved in climate action? And like partly that project was inspired with the youth strike for climate. I was working in Bristol actually at the time. There was Greta Thunberg, and there was a school strike. I was working in the council office, and there was so much loud noise from outside of young people. But one thing that I noticed, there wasn't that many diverse young people in terms of ethnicity as well. And Bristol's a very diverse city. So one thing that I guess got me wondering, who gets involved in climate action? Who cares about it? And I think for most young people, it's an area that they care about, but not really be conscious that they're caring about climate action. So it was really important for me to make sure that designing the program in London is like, how do we get young people, diverse voices to talk about climate change? And so yeah, it was like a 8-week lab where we collaborate with different creatives, from like a filmmaker, director, somebody who was involved in like a community gardening initiative, somebody from the fashion sector. So it's like, how do we just provide an environment for young people to talk about their local area and start to identify things that they might have not linked to climate change but actually are linking. And the outcome of that was a zine that we made. I do have it with me, but I did
you shared the images, and I'm hoping to share them as well.
We made a zine, and all the young people came from different parts of London, which was really amazing because it meant that they could share what their local area was like. A variety of ages, ethnicities, backgrounds and abilities. And I think the outcome really was getting them to talk about their local area and then understand, what could I do about this? So every week we set little challenges, such as growing seed bombs we made and in the local area. And yeah, just getting kind of equipped about climate change. So we had a magazine, a climate change focused magazine come in called It's Freezing in LA, who did a workshop with them around narrative building and understanding, doing research around climate change. We also had a researcher who was researching about trees in London, and how that councils do all these trying to add trees to streets, but then there's no provision in the budget for maintaining them. So a lot of them are actually not being well maintained, and then they eventually don't last, so they have to be replaced or they don't exist anymore. So yeah, it was a really eye-opening experience, because I guess the end of it was we had a showcase where we had talks from young people who were talking about what they learned from the program, but also how they see change happening in that area, and how important climate action is. But yeah, I think being able to give young people a space to talk and actually talk about their experiences is really important. It's not necessarily you get that in school, where you're able to share your experiences and also understand, put each other's shoes. So yeah, and I think, and linking that back to cities and also careers, one thing that was a big outcome is learning about different careers that are about how do you work in a sector that talks about climate action, or does you do a job that helps with combating climate change. And I think a lot of them learn about jobs and careers that they've never heard of or known about, because it's not something that's, you know, like shared with them in school, for instance, or out in like the public domain. So getting them to think about how maybe in the future they can work towards careers that have an impact on kind of trying to address climate change as well. So
yeah, it sounds like a brilliant project, and I'm not surprised it's something that you put forward as a project that you're proud of, and I can see why. And really nice that you had such a diverse range of young people that got involved in it from different areas. I imagine there were lots of differences, but also some similarities perhaps between them on how they were experiencing their local area.
yeah, for sure.
And another image you've shared, Karen, is actually like a place that is really inspirational. Actually, I didn't know about it, and it's incredible actually to see. It's funny, before how you were talking about design and urban planning and having that bigger picture and understanding the whole kind of infrastructure of a place, the roads, etc., the green spaces, the houses, the services that are provided in the area. But this place, no roads.
No
really. Can you tell us a little bit about the Gambier Lake Village that you put forward?
Village, yeah, so that's in Benin, which is in West Africa, and it's actually a town, like a fully functioning town that's on water. And in terms of the history of the place, it was a tribe that was kind of escaping entrapment from like slavery. So they escaped to this area of Benin that was totally all on water, and they've built a city, basically not a city, but a town that's on stilts. It's a fully functioning town with schools, there's a hotel, you know, there's markets and there's houses, so there's different areas as well, and there's about just over 40,000 inhabitants, which I think is really amazing. And also they grow their own food, but I think it's a really good example of how, like, you know, using the resources how communities can use the resources that they have to create something amazing, and also thinking about sustainable principles. So as I mentioned, like a lot of all the houses are sort of built using bamboo, sustainable material, and they grow their own food, and also it's totally on water. So when we think about the world, which is 70% of the world is made up of water, I think it's like a really amazing and an innovative project that a lot of other cities can learn from, because there's a big massive focus on like land and filling land, especially in cities with as many buildings as possible. But this community is just like, they function, and like what I really found amazing was that because it's on water, a lot of the young kids, they learn how to row a boat from a young age, and like it's part of their life. Water is part of their life, and I think I can't imagine that being my way of life, but it just seems like a really amazing way of life, how everything is functioning. You know, they have a post office as well and a hospital. So I think when it comes to designing cities, it's really about thinking outside of the box. And if you're presented with challenges, like the challenge of water, for instance, is like, how can you, I think the amazing thing is about being a designer or somebody who works in the built environment is that you can come up with really amazing creative innovations to combat issues and problems. So that's something that excites me about the built environment, is that we can actually make change through thinking creatively. And I think every time that I've worked in different roles, I think there's always been an aspect of where I've been like, oh, okay, this project, there's problems in this, there's lots of problems that need to be solved, but when you actually solve some of these problems, it makes a real difference. And I think successful places require like the community to get involved as well, and that's the only way where you can think, actually we're making a big difference. So yeah,
I think it was really inspiring to see that village, and you've shared a video. Are we okay to share that as?
That's a YouTube
video, because it's amazing to think how old it is as well. It's over 500 years.
Yeah.
Over 500 years old, and it's still fully functional now, and it's grown in that time too. So it's just amazing to see that, and like a really great contrasting place to live compared to like London, for example. Do you go back to Malawi often? And when you do you feel a real difference in place and how you're experiencing place there compared to?
Yeah, I think, I do go back, and I think it's very different in terms of like being in London, being in maybe like the capital city. There's more buildings, but I think the things that I like there's so many things that I like about Malawi. There's so many things I like about the UK, but I think one thing that what really noticed as well is like food growing is like a big massive thing. So a lot of families have their own like gardens and plots where they grow food.
Oh, wow.
And you're like, it's fresh food and it's organic. I think that's something it was a big shock of how like reliant upon we are on supermarkets here. It's not to say that there's not supermarkets there, but I think a lot of communities grow their own food and sustain themselves by growing their own food, which I think is actually a really like great way of being sustainable.
Yeah.
The weather, difference in weather and climate, obviously here it rains more, but yeah, having a difference. And I think every city has its challenges, and I think especially one thing that I'd say about Malawi, like is that, you know, there's lots of under resources and poverty, but I think the one thing that I always come to appreciate is the ability of like communities to you know, sustain themselves using little or no resources. Like if you go to the village and how there's like lots of the way that it's built and like it's sustaining itself. Like an example of the Gambia village is like they've created a community and they're able to sustain themselves, and also the low impact on you know, on the society they're having. So like you realize how much pollution cities like London is producing versus cities in countries, cities and villages and towns in countries in Africa is like a tiny footprint compared to the UK. So I think there's a lot that I say the Western world can learn from settlements that are in you know, low income communities, like in places like Africa. Like there's so much innovation happening without, you know, when you have less, you are more creative with what you produce.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much that you know, we're kind of spoiled here because we have access to everything, but when you don't have access to everything, you're a little more, you think more about how you can improve, like you know, sustainability and how you're able to not cause harm to or damage, you know, to the earth. And I think that's something that I'd say contrasting the two is like it's more evident in places like in Malawi, especially in the rural areas where, you know, they're just using what they have to grow things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. When you don't have the same access or you have less, then you are more inventive with what you have and more creative in how you can make things work. And do you think though that the pandemic and this whole experience has made people think a little, I mean, that alongside the climate crisis and the, you know, younger generation really being quite what's the word, environmentally conscious in lots of ways, and you kind of see this whole movement to with veganism and also kind of grow your own kind of, do you think people are becoming a little bit more conscious of where's their nearest green space, appreciating nature nearby? This is a small plot of land, I could maybe grow my own food here. You know, the whole experience of actually going to the supermarket during the pandemic was just crazy. I wonder if it has made people reflect more on, you know, what's around them, where they are living. Yeah, just a bit more conscious of it. What's your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, like the pandemic really opened up issues around the inequalities in cities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah.
So access to like green space, and like I think for me personally, like I value green space even more after like we're still in it, but at that time I felt so lucky to be close to a green space. So I think it's opened up like opportunities for people who are involved in like city making to think, okay, these are really important aspects. And you know, there's a mention of like 15-minute cities, how having things close to your local area and having like a hub where you've got access to a high street, you know, green spaces and how important that is in the functioning of an area. And equally as well, when it comes to like, yeah, the food aspect is like, you know, there's a lot of food poverty at the moment and prices going up. So it's like, how can we're going to have to think about ways to combat that issue. And long term is like, we import so much food in the UK. It's like a big massive reliance upon that. And in instances where prices are going up, there's going to have to be something that happens where they're thinking about, okay, how can we open up more spaces to grow food and produce things here, you know, in the UK. And I think conversations like that, I definitely welcome them, because I think the more people know, like, you know, you can grow your own, even growing your own food, like it's quite an amazing thing that you can grow certain foods, and also it's cost efficient long run. So it's like being able to access that information or know how to do it, and perhaps even actually have access to space. So having like, I think some of the things that when we were doing another thing, urban design, is that there's a whole focus on allotment spaces. Also, like, you know, how can allotments be accessible for community groups that might not be able to pay for a plot, for instance, like pooling of resources. But yeah, I think definitely COVID has had an impact. I think there's more empathy, and I think when it comes down to placemaking and in the built environment, it is all about empathy. So being able to understand people's needs and concerns, and being able to like design, implement that in through design. So yeah, I think COVID has made empathy bigger, hopefully. Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Oh, great. So I just I'll kind of maybe finish off asking what, I mean, you have talked a little bit about what you find most exciting about the built environment, but is there anything in particular that you can think about looking forward to the future that you feel really hopeful about or excited for? And that can be beyond placemaking as well, just generally. It could be related to activate the city and the direction that might go, or it could be, anything really as to what are you most excited for or hopeful about?
I think to be honest, I think the thing I'm most excited for is like there's an emerging like of emergence of young people who are going to be these change makers and make change happen. Like you know, I've witnessed so many young people who have like they've got so much enthusiasm and hope for the future, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these young people in like positions of power, like, where they're able to make a difference and make a change, and have that understanding of like how do we make the world a better place, for instance. And it's a big burden for I say it's a big burden for young people as well right now, where they're the ones who are seen as the ones that are going to make a difference. So one thing that I'm also looking forward to is like, how do even the older generation, like how do they work with young people to make change, but helping see that change. And I think it's exciting that a lot more young people are interested in like policy and politics, and you know, hopefully we have new policies that are a bit better for like society in general. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about. And with Activate the City, I think seeing what other projects we create. And one thing that I love doing is collaborating with organizations. So just like having amazing collaborators and, you know, working with lots of different organizations and hopefully working more globally. That would be really exciting. And seeing, being able to kind of work with young people across the globe, that would be like my ultimate aim, basically.
Well, that would be incredible. I think that would be great. And definitely I can see that happening. And finally, Karen, what advice would you give your 17-year-old self now, knowing what you know professionally, all your wealth of experience of doing architecture, working in housing, the urban design master, like, you know, your current work now? Is there anything you would have done differently or not really? Or is there any advice you would give yourself at 17?
Well, let's think about 17, that's A-level Yeah, I'd say just like not worry about like your path. So being open to trying different things. And I think when you're a young person, you think of a certain path, but actually it's like kind of a roller coaster ride. And you have ups and downs, but I think at the end, just really like go back to what makes you happy and what you're passionate about, and let that be the thing that you lead with. So not just trying to do something because someone just told you to do it, or you think that's the path that you should take. But if you think that genuinely in your heart, if you are passionate about something, then just go for it. So just trying things and seeing how they go.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, a roller coaster is a good way to describe it. Yeah. Oh, Karen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your perspectives on really interesting things.